The year is 40 AD, and it is not a good time to be a Hun. Having received the business end of famed Chinese General Ban Chao's fists, the Hunnic Confederacy was on the brink of total collapse. Refusing to die quietly, they threw themselves into a series of frenzied raids against the Han, capturing the wealth and material necessary to begin rebuilding their fractured nation. They railed against the Han with a fury, ever vigilant for further attempts to destroy them. The final knife in their back, however, would not come from the north. The mighty heart of the Huns would be stilled at last by one of their own. Let us travel back in time 240 years. Patricide, Moduchanyu, ruthless invasions, skull cups. Remember that? This branch of the Hunnic people got off to a whirlwind start, fracturing other nomadic confederations into powerless splinters and asserting themselves as the lords of the steppe. Most of these splinters would eventually assimilate into their conquerors, but a few maintained some degree of autonomy. One of these latter types was named the Xianbei, and they will be the stars of this period in Mongolia's history. Back to 40 AD, and the Xianbei and the Huns are good friends. They raided together, sladed together, and plated together. But you know what's better than friendship? Money! And the settling of age-old legitimate grievances that resulted in your ancestors' remains being used as kitchen utensils and power! In 49 AD, the Xianbei and the Han drew up a contract negotiating payment for each Hunnic head delivered, and these two were good friends. No more. After a period of frenzied combat, the Xianbei captured the Hun leader, flaying him and his followers alive and converting their skins into wall hangings. With this, the cycle of morbid objectification was complete, and the Xianbei stepped up to claim their place as the true rulers of the steppe. But they had a problem. The Xianbei had been greatly funding their expansion through the delivery of Hun heads to the Chinese, and the Han were now calmly explaining that now that all the Huns had been beheaded, there was no further reason to continue the contract. It was about at this point that the Xianbei leader said something along the lines of, Okay, what about we strike a new deal? This time, you pay us for every head we don't cut off. And whose heads will you not be cutting? Oh, I should have known. A common theme in Mongolian history is that the periods of the most glorious action and badassery are often achieved through the efforts of individual men, great war heroes who lead their people forward to infamy. The Xianbei had found their hero in a humble oxygen merchant, determined to cut down anyone who enjoyed his product without paying his fee. He spearheaded a long series of raids into Han territory, using his ill-gotten gains to bring other nomadic alliances to heel and conquer everything the Huns once held. The Xianbei were no Huns, however. Their warriors bore Hunnic blood, yes, but they fought side by side with the Huns' eternal enemy, the Han. These warriors knew the power of Han technology and engineering firsthand and welcomed defectors into their inner circles. Military deserters, criminals, and those too rough and tumble for the pretentious Han court flocked to the Xianbei, creating an engine fueled by alcohol and testosterone that would soon consume the entire steppe. This mnemonically vexing hero's tactics paved the way for future Xianbei leaders, driving them to expand their holdings up to the taigas of Lower Siberia and the coasts of the Caspian Sea, giving their confederacy the right to be called the Xianbei Empire. Glutted on loot and land from this rapid expansion, Emperor Tanchi Hui was having difficulties managing his new territory. So he devised a brilliant and wholly original idea. Hey guys, what if we split the empire into 3 pieces? Tanchi Hui, no! Tanchi Hui, yes! Although wealthier and larger in size than it had ever been, the divided empire was infinitely easier for the Chinese to handle. They progressively pushed the Xianbei further away from their territories, and by the time the Three Kingdoms period arrived, some 200 years after the rise of the Confederation, they were so splintered as to be completely irrelevant. Let's talk about the Three Kingdoms period for a bit. After they repelled the Xianbei, China realized that the only thing they hate more than nomadic raiders is themselves, and fractured into a brutal war of dominance. I won't go into detail about the rest, as there are many wonderful channels that tell the story very, very well. For the purposes of this video, we just need to know that many wars happened, the Han collapsed, and 3 new kingdoms rose to replace them: Wei, Shu, and Wu. While China was breaking, the heroes of our story were far, far away. Much like the Huns before them, the Xianbei splintered into many fragments. One of these fragments was unique, however, as it was composed entirely of the Xianbei's former slaves, now masterless after the dissolution of their lords. Being comprised chiefly of border reavers, deserters, and convicts, the Xianbei were usually perfect gentlemen in every regard. As such, you may be shocked to learn that they would sometimes participate in a little game called Surprise Marriage and All the Dudes Get Enslaved trademark. Oh, you. Warlords will be warlords. Because of these tendencies, the Xianbei slaves gradually grew more and more genetically and socially similar to their masters until they basically assumed their cultural identity altogether. This disparate group of former slaves banded together to form the Rouran. At first, the Rouran were ignored, the other splinters of the Xianbei mocking them as wriggling worms due to their history of slavery. This disparaging attitude lasted right about until the Rouran united behind their bloodthirsty hero, Yuijulu Shelun, and systemically crushed any who opposed them, uniting the steppe once more into the Rouran Khaganate. It was now 405 AD, nearly 200 years since the Xianbei Empire had collapsed. Once major players in Chinese politics, the nomads of the steppes had lived in a fog of ignorance for generations, mostly left to their own devices as China immolated itself on the horizon. For the first time in centuries, nomadic feet tread tentatively up the Silk Road, wind-weathered hearts glowing with the embers of a passion long forgotten, ready to reclaim their rightful place astride the world. Oh, you bastards. Allow me to explain. While most of the Xianbei remnants had been bickering amongst themselves in the steppe, one splinter had made its way up to China proper. Through the masterful application of 2 types of penetration, they somehow wrestled control of the kingdom of Wei away from the descendants of its founder, the legendary warlord Cao Cao. Now, they were meeting their distant cousins, unpleasant reminders of the times they had spent living as unwashed savages on the steppes, owning only what they could carry in a horse cart, living as one with the great forces of nature, free from the outbreaks of plague brought on by cities and endless enslavement to agriculture. How terrible! Regardless, the Rouran and the Wei hated each other with a burning passion, and they immediately began to war over it. The Wei were confident, calling themselves tigers and wolves, while likening the Rouran to mere beasts of prey. Despite this confidence, they were evenly matched with their relatively underdeveloped cousins, pure nomadic spirit proving unyielding before superior arms. Unable to best the Rouran on a level field, the Emperor of Wei resorted to his fail-safe tactic, the old P&P. By forging bonds of marriage between leading Wei and Rouran families, the Emperor pacified the nomads and began to draw them into a greater confederation. 9 long years passed, and the Rouran finally lowered their guard. The Emperor immediately stabbed them in the back, launching a surprise campaign against the unprepared Khaganate. The Wei inflicted a crushing defeat on the Khagan, but before he could rally against them, a new threat appeared on the horizon. The Mongolian steppe had become the stomping ground of a new player in this game of nations, the Gokturks. So similar, yet so different from their nomadic brethren of the steppes, the Gokturks and the Rouran soon came to blows, and the exchange did not end well for the weakened Khaganate. Harried from every direction, the Khagan fled with the last of his men to the lands of Wei, begging asylum from his former enemies, betrayers, and masters. Had he looked towards the past, perhaps he would have been able to foresee the future. The Wei had hearts of stone when it came to the Rouran and immediately took them prisoner. Soon, the Khagan and his final followers were delivered into the hands of the Gokturks as a trifling political favor, and this branch of the Mongolian people was snuffed out once and for all.